In the previous video, we've looked at fear and fear management in relation to terrorism. And in this video, we're going to explore the future of terrorism. What can we expect in the years to come? What type of terrorist groups, type of attacks will we be confronted with in, let's say, 5 or 10 years from now? Well, of course, I don't have a crystal ball and it's impossible to predict the future. But we can look at root causes, trends and developments, and develop scenarios that give us a little bit more insight into possible futures of terrorism. So what are we going to do? First, we are going to look at past attempts at scenarios and future forecasts of terrorism. And next we will see how we can build on these achievements of past attempts and how we can add to this body of knowledge by making use of your insights as a follow-up to the questionnaire that we provided in the first week of this course. Considering the complexity of the phenomenon of terrorism, it's actually surprising to see how many people have tried to look into its future. And the number of predictions or forecasts have increased dramatically after 9/11. But unfortunately, so far, the general outcome of these studies is relatively poor. We see that a lot of scholars or experts find it very difficult to forecast changes in the modus operandi of terrorism, the changes in the use of tactics and weapons. And the attacks on 9/11 are a case in point. Well, although the 9/11 Commission speaks of a shock and not a surprise, here you have a copy of the report of the 9/11 Commission. It says that there were apparent analytical failures on the part of those who were supposed to keep the United States safe from terrorism. And in their chapter Foresight and Hindsight, they actually present what perhaps is the biggest failure, and that is the failure of imagination. They didn't see it coming, a failure of imagination. Well, when looking at publications on the future of terrorism by think tanks, academia and government agencies in the period after 9/11, we see many different types of forecasts with different intentions, different methodologies, if they have any methodology, and different purposes. Well, unfortunately, many studies are rather vague and very imprecise regarding their prediction. They're not very transparent. However, most arrive at 3 very obvious and not very specific general conclusions. And these 3 main conclusions are the following. Again, some of them, or maybe all of them, are very obvious. The first one is terrorism will continue to exist in the future. And the second one is terrorism is not static, but a changing phenomenon that is likely to change in the future. And then the third general conclusion looks into why it's changing in the future, and it says that these changes will be influenced by structural factors, be it geopolitical, demographical, technological, or ideological. This raises the question to what extent these studies actually contribute to more insight into what is yet to come. Moreover, the vagueness or lack of methodology and the lack of a proper theoretical foundation of these studies should be mentioned. As a result, the body of literature provides actually only limited insight about the causes of change and what factors are deemed to be more important in shaping the future of terrorism than others. But there are exceptions to the rule, and I would like to mention this book by Brynja Lia, Globalization and the Future of Terrorism, Patterns and Predictions. A great book about the future of terrorism, looking actually at these patterns and predictions. Well, what I would also like to stress is that most of the forecasts on terrorism actually tell us more about today's terrorism than terrorism in the future. In fact, in most cases, current trends and latest incidents dominate the reports and studies. And this should not necessarily be considered negatively, as the future or tomorrow is very often more or less the same as today. However, from time to time we do know that terrorists manage to surprise us with new types of attacks or different types of groups, sometimes with means that we could hardly imagine. So therefore we cannot afford to simply expect the future of terrorism to be more or less the same as today. At least if we want to avoid unpleasant surprises, we cannot permit another failure of imagination, as was the case with 9/11. So we need to be able to look beyond today, or at least to have some idea of what the future might bring. Well, in a report for the ICT and in a study for the Journal for Strategic Security, I noticed that most future forecasts are made by persons, mainly men, who deal with counterterrorism on a daily basis, who are mainly from Western countries, and among them are people who didn't see 9/11 coming, and who produce reports that are not very transparent nor systematic in their approach in forecasting terrorism. Therefore, I argued for a more systematic approach using fresh pair of eyes. And I also suggested that we should ask a more geographically and gender balanced group, including young, non-expert persons, to help us to look into the future of terrorism. And we suggested to do so by way of a survey. Well, such an approach is not an alternative to the existing body of literature on future forecasts, but it could contribute to a more systematic and broader approach to look into the future of terrorism, and might also produce more imagination, more out-of-the-box thinking. Well, as we have learned from the questionnaires in the first 4 weeks, we know that this group is capable of providing excellent ideas, and we believe that you could be actually of great help to policy makers and scholars, and you can offer interesting ideas because of your global perspective, because you have a fresh pair of eyes, or, and that holds for some of you, by way of your experience in the field of security that is not directly linked to terrorism. Well, in order to use this unique potential of this community, we came up with a questionnaire on root causes and key developments that might shape the future of terrorism. And we also want to ask you again, but now in more detail, about a possible fifth wave of terrorism, again linked to the article by David Rappaport, which we presented in the first week. Well, please have a look at the questions, and you could do us a great favor if you would take the time to fill this out. Again, we really feel that this group has a great potential to provide both policymakers and scholars with new and different insights into possible trends and developments that will determine the future of terrorism, that will determine also future policy making and future research into terrorism. To sum up, in this video we explored attempts to forecast the future of terrorism. And we noticed that many studies do not arrive at very specific outcomes, very specific conclusions. And partly as a result of this, from time to time, terrorists manage to surprise us. Therefore, we need to improve our forecast, and to that end also the questionnaire on the future of terrorism. In the next video, I will look at the course objectives and say a few words about the research, the discussion forum, and I would like to thank all the people that made this course possible.